Okay, you're now live.
Thank you, Krista. And it is 4:30, so I'm going to call this meeting of the Judiciary and Law Committee to order. It is August 20, what is it today? 23rd. This is the regular monthly meeting of the Judiciary and Law Committee. I shouldn't say regular because we're a little bit different tonight in that we're going to do some of the department budgets and the rest we will do next week. And as a matter of fact, before we call the roll, I just want to mention that I told the staff that they didn't need to attend both meetings. I didn't think it was a good use of their time. So you do have staff reports from all the departments. If there are burning questions, we can certainly address those at the appropriate time. And if there are questions for those staff members who are meeting next week, I hope they can wait until then. Call the roll. Supervisor Zons is not with us, and Supervisor Rogers is absent excused. He's traveling today. I expect Supervisor Zons to weigh in. I hope he does shortly, but in any case, we do have a quorum, so we can begin the meeting. And I would start with approval of the minutes from the July 26th meeting. Supervisor Vandermillen moves, Bauer seconds. Any questions, additions, corrections to the minutes from July 26th? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve say aye or raise your hand either way. I can see everybody. Any opposed? Thank you. Also with us tonight, in addition to the committee members, are a number of staff that are normally with us, and Keith Stry, who will be leading us through the budget discussions, and Supervisor Bartlett is here. We have no public comments. Item number 5, staff reports. Are there any questions for the staff members present? Any of the staff members present wish to comment? I kind of indicated that we were going to cut this part of the meeting short unless there was something significant that needed to be addressed. So if that's the case, that's fine as well. Seems like I had something, but now I can't remember what it was. Seeing none, those reports are in your minutes and you can always take a look at those. I'm hopeful that next month when we get back on a regular schedule, we can address any questions you might have. Then we can get right on to, there are nothing for item number 6 on the agenda. We can start right out with a budget discussion, which is item number 7. And already the meeting is going a little quicker than I anticipated it might, so that's always good. Let me just kind of fill you in on what's happening. If you have your agenda in front of you, you'll see that we're going to be talking about the child support budget, emergency management, 911, and medical examiner budget today. The other 3 are going to be discussed next week. I see Sarah Benedict is with us. We will not review the budget from CJCC because that is, strictly speaking, the purview of the Committee on Administration. Sarah, for the past, oh boy, how many years, has been good enough to report to Judiciary and Law as well, because of the close tie-in with so many of the departments. So I appreciate that. I appreciate her being here tonight. But Sarah, if you've got important business, feel free to attend to that. Otherwise, if you want to sit and listen to a discussion of other budgets, that's fine too. Well, I'm sorry, Sarah, did you?
Nope, just said thank you.
Oh, okay. The process that we're going to use when we get to the department budget, I'm going to ask the department head to go through their I forgot what it's called already. The organizational chart. I thought it would be helpful if we take a look at the positions. If there is anything new, we'll want to discuss that, obviously. Or if there are unfilled positions, we can talk about that a little bit. And at that point, I'm going to turn it over to our finance director, Keith Stry, and Keith will kind of guide us through each of the individual budgets. Does anybody have questions, suggestions, comments before we begin? Excuse me. Yeah, Dave?
I'd just like to say that this is the opportunity for the supervisors that are not on the executive committee to weigh into the budget. And as you realize, we have to come up with a balanced budget. And if every department, every committee forwards on a budget that has been submitted, like the one that was submitted, that the administration team is going to have to come up with some cuts to the budget to make it balanced. And now's your chance to help make that balanced. If there's something you would like to see, what you feel is a high priority or a low priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Bartlett. Anybody else questions or comments at this point? I'm operating from a document that shows in terms of the levy limit, we're 2.7 million roughly over. Is that correct, Keith?
Yes.
Okay.
Excuse me, I had to find my mute button. Yes, that is correct.
And that's the document that you'll be sharing. That's the one that you've got in your, well, it wasn't in your packet, but it's in the administration finance department's website.
Correct. And if I can touch on that very quickly as we're
Yep, go ahead.
kind of setting the table here. Yeah, for the benefit of the committee and as a reminder, at the July 28th county board meeting, we presented an initial summary of the 2022 budget requests and then compared that to estimates for the levy limit restrictions, as well as your goal, your being the county board's goal on how much they were willing to borrow for the capital improvement plan. And in total, the total deficit was just short of 5 million. 2.2 million of that, or I'm sorry, 2.7 million of that overage tied to borrowing for capital projects predominantly, and 2.7 million for levy limit. These are all estimates. State of Wisconsin still has to provide us some information yet. Unfortunately, our equalized value went up a very small amount, which doesn't lend to a whole lot of growth in our ability to raise additional tax levy. But I won't know until we get, it's late August, early September. I believe it's the first week of September, I get the worksheet for the levy limits. But based on history, it's going to be anywhere between $100,000 and $200,000 maximum. So with a budget this size, that isn't much additional revenue. But it is what it is. Those are the restrictions we have to operate under. So going to Chairman Bartlett's comments. Yes, this is, we're looking for ideas. We're looking for feedback from the individual committees. As far as process goes, we'll start with the org chart for each of the three departments being presenting tonight to talk about their staffing. The departments can present that to you. Then when that's done, we'll shift over to the actual numbers and we'll go through, and what I'll do, what we've done successfully, and it's worked well in other committees, is I just scroll through and point out any highlights or any things that are significantly changing. And plus, at any time, the committee members can stop me and we can have conversation on specific line items. The departments are here and prepared, should be prepared to answer the information on each of those, and I can assist with things to a point as well. So that's kind of where we're at. The challenge is significant. There is a path, I believe, but we're definitely going to need input and feedback. We've got a prioritization plan that the county board's approved, a capital improvement plan. You've established goals. Now it's going through and really trying to make everything balance out.
Thank you, Keith. Can I ask a question about the document itself? I'm looking at it, and were you going to share your screen? Do you want to do that now? And
Let me bring it up. I've got it up on my
Okay.
second computer. So yeah, I can bring that up.
Okay.
Just take me a second here. Let's see here. That's the problem with two computers. You gotta remember which one you're on.
And my question really has to do with layout more than anything else, but
You bet. All right. Well, and we've got a little bit of time here. So yeah, we can take advantage of that. Okay. I'm going to, if you don't mind, then I will share my screen and hope everything works here. So give it a shot. And there we go. Is everybody seeing the budget summary?
that's the one.
Okay. All right.
Now, I have questions about the highlighting, most of it towards the bottom.
Yep.
There's some gold highlighting there for the highway department. Can you explain that?
Sure. And we touched on it very high level at county board. And predominantly I was highlighting the fact that there is a large number,
Okay.
large amount of capital projects that were requested. 1 million of them alone were for match of federal state dollars for projects, 80-20 splits. And certainly those were in request, but overall between those two funding sources, there was a large influx of capital projects that were requested.
Okay, so the gold highlighting really is simply to draw attention to.
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
because it definitely very notable, just like the goals below, showing the variances of where we are in comparison to limits and goals.
Okay, then the yellow highlighting in the bottom left box, yellow highlights, again, just to draw attention, or is there a significance?
Nope, you're spot on. It's to draw attention
Okay.
for supervisors as well as myself in presenting this to, draw your eyes to the fact that here's how we come out as based on initial estimates.
And one of the things in that left-hand box you'll notice came up at that meeting, and that's the library funding, which is outside the levy limits, which is why it's listed there.
Correct. Yeah, because we do include them. We have to include them in our budget. We include them in the levy resolution, just like bridge petitions for other towns and townships, but they don't count against our levy limit.
And yeah, and I hope I was clear about that at the meeting. This is money that the taxpayers will be levied for. I mean, this is part of their tax bill, but that $801,000. If it's an increase of $100,000 this year, that doesn't mean something else has to decrease by 100,000. This is over and above that. The green highlighting in the right-hand box.
Again, those are identifying basically the capital improvement plan. This year, 2021 was your first full year of adopting a full 5-year plan. Okay. And this is basically adding this box this year to show the goal for borrowing in the CIP was 3 million per that plan. And the requested debt was 5.284 million. And to show you the difference. And then at the bottom there in yellow is bringing those two variances together to show your total net variance that needs to be addressed through the budget process to meet that limit and the goals.
And that 2.707 million is the amount of requested expenditure that would exceed our ability to levy.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that when we were looking at this, we're kind of all singing out of the same songbook.
You bet.
Keith, was there anything else in general you wanted to go over before we begin with the budgets?
I think that hits the highlights. Certainly there will be specific points that'll be in the budgets that'll tie back into this bigger picture, but it does lay the table that, like Chairman Bartlett had mentioned, executive committee and everybody working together is going to have a challenge to sort through all this to make it balance. It can be done. It's just there's going to be a bit of work this year.
Okay, thank you. Then, if we're ready, I think what we'll do is we'll start with the child support budget. And that document was wasn't in your packet, but it is in the documents that are available from the Finance Department website. And Keith, you're going to run us through this too. And again, what I would like to do is start with the Child Support Agency organizational chart, take a look at the positions, talk about if there's anything new, different, unfunded, those kinds of things. So again, if you're ready to share your screen.
I am. Here you go. This should be the organizational chart for the Child Support Agency, should be up. Okay,
and at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Josie and to Keith. And I don't know, I suppose, Josie, maybe it makes sense to start with you. Do you want to talk about the organizational chart at all? Is there anything unique, interesting? Well, interesting. It's all interesting.
Absolutely.
Anything unique or significant or unusual about this? Any changes, etc.?
Sure. So prior to this year, there were 5 specialist positions. One of those had been funded but unfilled for several years. So after I started, I took that 5th specialist away and used that funding to fund a legal secretary position. And then I unfilled the secretary 1 position. And that was subsequent to that position becoming vacant. So I still have the secretary position. I'm asking for it to be funded and unfilled right now. And the reason being is Sue Mork retired, early on in June, after 30 plus years in the child support program. And how our funding works is the majority of our funding is through performance incentives. And we're not going to realize the loss of Sue until 2 budgets from now. So the funding that I have for 2022 is based on the performance that the staff had 2 years ago. So right now I have 2 new hires. They haven't even been here a month that I'm training, and I can't add a 3rd. But I would like to have that possibility in 2022 when things settle down a little bit.
Let me see if I can get this clear in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
The secretary position is currently unfilled.
Correct.
And that's going to have a negative impact on your performance rating?
Well, so right now, we're trying to, this legal secretary position is newly created.
Mhm.
And I'm trying to get everybody up and running and full speed ahead. And the training curve in our field, it's 3 years. It takes a long time. And until that person is fully, benefiting our office, the other staff are having to fill in and do coverage. So if I could hire a secretary, which is a very entry level basic thing, they can do a lot of that busy work, building and creating new files and, routing faxes and mail, while everybody else is doing the other things.
And what if you were unable to hire a secretary and the well, I shouldn't call it professional staff, but the folks whose main duties are elsewhere wound up doing that work.
Mhm.
When you say it would have a negative impact on your performance rating and that has an impact on funding,
Absolutely.
um,
And that's,
is there any way to quantify that?
well, Sue, who is no longer with us, had the best performance numbers in the agency. So I have to kind of get everyone to step up their game, I guess, and, strive for better all the time. I do share as part of our, my written report, I'm giving the committee members every quarter kind of where we're at performance-wise compared to the state. And we are performing better than the state average, but 2 goals are still not being met, which means we are not earning the full funding available in those measures. So if the work allocation has to be divvied up, and all the work is important, and I don't want to diminish what anybody does. But if the specialists particularly are doing more of the administrative type work, it's taking their focus away from the performance improving work. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. And again, is there any way to quantify that? I mean, how much money are we talking about?
Well, I don't know if I can quantify it right now. And we're gonna, I guess this year's performance, I guess, will be a test. So our fiscal year ends on September 30th. And however we finish on September 30th is going to drive the performance funding that we have to work with 2 years from now. And this, what you're looking at right now, is what we've been working under in 2020. Or excuse me, 2021. So then I might have a better idea at the end of the year. Although we had Sue through half of that year, or more than half, because the fiscal year runs from October 1st through September 30th. So Sue would have been here from October through essentially the full month of May.
Okay, so what we're looking at in terms of your budget request is for 4 full-time child support specialists, a fiscal clerk, a legal secretary, and funding for a secretary position will not be filled immediately?
Potentially, yes. I mean, I just, if you look at my staff, I have a caseload too. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. I have a caseload of about 100 cases. So, I end up doing my casework a lot on Saturdays because there's no time during the week. So with training 2 people right now, to bring in a third person, I'd be spread way too thin. A third person that needs to be trained.
When do you anticipate that secretary position might become, it might be a viable situation where you could bring somebody in?
Probably July. I will have had my 2 new hires right now. Both start at the end of July this year. And so with 1 year under their belt, they should be able to fly more solo.
Right.
Now, if I can add to this, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
This presentation, and Josie, correct me if I'm wrong, what's taken place here is really a reallocation between positions, but your total FTE count has not changed.
Yes.
Overall. So this is kind of being responsive in some respects, and Josie's had a lot of conversations with us about this. not looking to add staff, but to realign to the needs as she sees them now in preparation for the future. So that's an important factor
Right.
when you're talking about it from a budgetary perspective.
All right. And Josie, I appreciate you started out your comments by saying we had 5 child support specialists. We're down to 4. All right. So
Right.
that's the position right there.
Yeah, and
Dave,
they each have a caseload of right around 500.
how many?
500.
Oh, my God.
Chairman Bartlett has a question.
Yeah, Dave, go ahead.
I have 2 questions, I guess. The first one is, when you're talking about the funding, that's funding that comes back to pay for, to offset levy limits in your department, correct?
So our funding, the bulk of our funding comes from federal match dollars. So how that works is, so when you're looking at probably the next slide that Keith's going to share, the budget, that's including the funding for this unfilled secretary and the match dollars we would get for expending that funding, but we're only going to get the match dollars if we actually expend it.
Right.
Which is why if you look at past years, it always looks like the child support agency is asking for way more levy than what they need. And that's because there were some funded but unfilled positions that the money wasn't actually spent, if that makes sense. For a long time, we were down a fiscal clerk. So we were down a fiscal clerk and a secretary. And for several years, we had to contract services with St. Croix County Child Support to do that role for us. But the position was still here. We just couldn't get anybody to take it.
Okay. My second question is I guess more of a suggestion, but as seeing you probably wouldn't fill this position until mid-year, why don't we fund it at half the expense of the position if we decide we want to leave this position in there? It would be more realistic to the budget and it would help the levy limit.
One correction would be that would then be basically looked at as a new position request, because it would be adding FTE count to this budget. I don't disagree with what you're saying.
I'm not talking about doing that. I'm talking about not funding it completely because it isn't going to be filled until July.
Right, but it still would be a
I'm
position
not changing
request.
it to a half-time position. I'm just taking a little bit of funding away. We have done that in the past over other years, and I thought it worked fairly well.
Yep. In this case, it would be adding to her budget request, to the child support agency request, because it currently, as presented, is not funded.
Is it funded or unfunded? Hold on.
It's unfunded.
I thought it was fun.
Unfunded.
It's
It's
unfunded.
unfunded.
It
Okay,
is not in the.
I understood that it was funded already.
I did too.
And sorry, I think
Okay.
I thought it was for a second too. I apologize.
All right.
for the
Well,
That's
confusion.
all right, but
Then,
that's actually why I was asking about timing.
Okay, then take away my statement.
Yeah, no, and that's why we do this as a team. Yeah, at this point, there are no position requests, half-time, full-time, or any additional funding requests in the child support agency budget request. What happened, like I said earlier, is Josie has reorganized the department, reducing one of the child support specialists.
Go
Your
ahead.
FTE count did not change this in this budget process. That's what you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
that you did not request additional hours. You went from 5 child support specialists down to 4.
Mhm.
Okay. And you added the legal secretary. So that's the swap.
Wasn't that in last
Well,
year's budget?
no,
though?
and then, so look at the,
I'm talking through. Yeah. And okay.
I think it
Let me
is
step
funded.
back.
So we did have, in addition, a 0.5 secretary that I eliminated. And it
That's the
says,
one
so-
I'm focused on. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yep.
so this secretary one position with the one little asterisk after it, the last one on the table here is funded. And that funding is included in my proposed 2022 budget.
Yep.
So
My
that goes back to-
apologies, everybody. My apologies. That was my
Then,
error.
then I'll go back to my original statement is, why don't we fund it for a half a year this year? Because we're not gonna fill it until mid-year anyway.
Yes, that is a possibility. I know we've done that in other areas in prior budgets.
Sure.
I can think of, at least one or two in this group alone that have done that. They just fund it to start July 1 or April 1 or
Right.
something like that.
We've done it in emergency management many times.
Sheriff's Department as well.
Yep.
All right. Anybody have any other questions that focus on or center on the organizational chart and the number of positions? If not, I'm going to turn it over to.
I'd like to get in. I had my
Oh,
hand.
go
up.
ahead,
I
Bob.
see it.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I didn't see you. You're off my screen here. Go
Okay.
ahead.
When you replaced the child specialist with this legal secretary, was there a cost increase on that, or was that an even move?
It was
And
an even move.
what does the legal secretary do as opposed to the specialist?
Sure. So when I came here last August, what this organizational chart looked like was we had 4 specialists working here. One was funded and unfilled, and a fiscal clerk, and then a secretary one. So the secretary one did very basic entry-level administrative type work. Okay. So coming from Eau Claire County, we had 3 legal secretaries in Eau Claire County. Chippewa County has 2. Dunn County had none. So what the specialists were doing in Dunn County is they were drafting all of their own legal documents, sending things out. Sorry? Sending out for service of process, monitoring those timelines, following up when the service didn't come back, doing the billing that came back with that. They were drafting their own orders. So they were doing all of that on all of their cases. So when the secretary one, the entry-level administrative type person, resigned and left in September of last year, I took that opportunity to, like a shell game, I kind of reallocated the funds that I had, and I took that funding for that unfilled specialist and created the legal secretary position. Went through all the process of getting that position, and I had somebody start in January, and she resigned after 4 months. So then we had to do another recruitment, and I just filled that position, and so she's not even, maybe a month today, she might have been here. So we're still figuring out how that position is gonna work, and I have a plan and a goal of what work I want to take away from the specialists to give to the legal secretary. But again, with the training, that hasn't come to fruition yet. It's going to take some time. So the specialists are still doing their own, a lot of their own work while Denise is being trained.
Does that answer your question, Bob?
Yeah, thank you.
Good. All right, anything else, or it's probably an appropriate time now to get right into the budget document itself. Josie, I don't know if you have anything you want to say about it first, or Keith. I'll kind of leave it up to the two of you to walk us through this.
Keith, you're muted.
He's trying to share his screen, I bet.
Yes, trying to hit too many buttons at one time usually doesn't work too well, does it? Let's see here. All right, here's the budget. And frankly, we can just dive into, we had really good discussion on the org chart, which probably hit the highlights of many of the points that Josie will want to go. So I will blow this up a little bit better so we can see it. And then we'll scroll through like we've done with other budgets. And this one is the Child Support Agency, and we'll note up here first the tax levy decrease. Josie, if you want to touch on basically the revenue sections here, these three items, obviously the major changes that took place this year.
Sure. So I spent a great deal of time working with my director mentor, Denise Shervy in Chippewa County, going over our past budgets and my current budget proposal. And I believe what my predecessor did in formulating her budget proposals was she added up our expenses and just multiplied it by 66% to figure out what the state grants would be. That's our federal match. And that's a pretty simplistic way to do it. There's actually a more complicated formula to figure that out. And so in doing that, I'm estimating more federal dollars coming in than just taking a straight 66% of expenses. I can go into that in greater detail if you want about what that formula is, but that's why that number is different.
And Josie, does that line up with historical actuals? That's one of the things that we've talked about
Yes.
in doing
Well,
this.
I mean, we've, historically, the 5-year average, the Child Support Agency hasn't come close to meeting the amount of levy that's been allocated to us.
When you're calculating the revenue, Josie, from and we're talking about state grants, or specifically, right?
Yep.
You calculate what you anticipate that revenue to be. The actual revenue must be calculated by the state based on a formula that they have established.
So, right. So if we, if this 2022 budget proposal went through as is, okay, and I'm, Keith, could you scroll down to the bottom for me?
Sure. All the way.
Yeah, I want to see what our expenses is in that bottom section. Okay. 751,979. Okay. If you just multiplied that by 66%, that's how previous year's budgets would have been presented to you. That's what the number would have been in there. And so I put that straight 66%, and the red on the margin is 496,306. How I actually came up with that number is that our total expenses plus our indirect costs, take away the amount of money that we don't get reimbursed for my fiscal clerk. We had a long discussion about that a few meetings ago, as I'm proposing to charge fees for non-40 cases. So I take away that amount, and then I subtract that last revenue line, that $5,000, because that isn't matchable. And then I also subtract the amount of our performance incentives, which isn't matchable. So that's how I came up with the 510. And if all of these expenses are actually expended, that number should be spot on.
And that's the question that Keith was getting at a minute ago, I think, and that is because we're to some extent projecting here, how accurate are those projections likely to be? And if I hear you correctly, the answer is pretty darn close.
Right. So, I mean, I would have to, essentially redo the expense portion, because my expenses won't be 751,000. It'd be 751,000 less whatever 1/2 of that position request is for salary and fringe. But then the formula is the same.
And this represents roughly 66% of our actual expenditures are going to come back to us in this line from state aid.
Correct.
So actually, if we were to reduce the budget line for pay by a half a year's salary, our reduction in state aid would be 66% of that half.
Right.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So that's how the child support budget works. This most simple way to think about it is if you asked me to cut $100 from my budget, I would actually have to cut 300 because I would be losing the federal match on top of what the county is no longer funding.
I don't understand that.
So then to add a position, let's say it's a $30,000 position, it's only costing the county $10,000 because the federal match. Does that? Maybe
Yes,
that's not
and I
an easy way to
understand.
think
The
about it.
previous statement I'm having trouble following, but I was never a math major in college.
Maybe to put it in just a different term, that if you're looking for a 1/3 or a cut of a fixed dollar amount, you'd have to increase that by essentially threefold to get
Right, to get
100%
that
impact.
dollar amount. Yeah,
Correct.
because of the loss of the 66%. Okay,
Correct. Yep.
all right.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
any other questions on, and I guess if you could, for the benefit, when we're in a share mode, we don't see everybody, so you may have to
Mhm.
speak up if you've got a question.
I have a question.
Okay.
You're talking about reimbursement here of the 66%,
Mhm.
but that isn't figured off what your budget is. That's figured off what you actually spend, correct?
Yes. So this number is
we're not-
realized. Go ahead.
If we lower that position to a half a cost for the half a year, we're not necessarily lowering what you're going to get from the state because you would only get it if you would have spent it.
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to point that out.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah,
and
we
the
only
cal-
get them,
the-
so every month we do, it's called a Spark report, and we have to enter all of our actual expenses. And that's when they calculate what they're actually gonna reimburse us, and then they pay it to us, I believe it's quarterly. So yeah, if we don't spend it, they're not reimbursing us for it.
And for the benefit of the group here, the position that you're talking about possibly funding only half year has an
Mhm.
option. In this iteration, this round of the budget as presented, the total cost for that position, wages and benefits, was $74,831. So you'd be cutting that in half on the expenditure side, but then Josie would have to recalculate what that would mean to the budget, meaning it wouldn't be a 1-for-1 reduction of 30+ thousand in tax levy. It'd be something less than that.
So we reduce our expenditures by about 35,000, but at the same time, we'd be reducing our revenue by about 22,000.
Yeah, throwing loose
Yeah.
or round numbers
Yeah.
around. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
But it's
so,
certainly
I don't
an option.
agree with that. Because if we're not planning on spending that money, then we're not gonna get that revenue.
right,
So.
Right. So you'd be reducing the revenue.
If we reduce our expenses by 35,000, we're not gonna reduce our revenue by 22 because we weren't gonna get it anyway because we weren't gonna spend it. Now, we're
Yeah, but
gonna we'll reduce the revenue on paper, but we never would have got it anyway.
no, and I didn't intend to say that. Based on the figures that we have, we could reduce expenditures by 35, reduce revenue by 22, and that's just projected numbers. That's not real money.
Right.
This is all budgeting. They're all estimates. So yeah, it's not
Right.
real until it's actually realized. till it's
Okay,
actual.
but still, another $12,000 closer to our levy limit is,
Okay, so I'm trying to do the math here. If my total expenses being 751, 979. If we reduce that 1/2 position, if I did my math right, it's 37,415. So I took that off of the expenses, did the rest of the calculation. So that brings our expenses down, doing the math. 66%. All right, so that would reduce that state grants line to 485,332.
yeah.
And I guess in the interest of time and moving things along,
Mhm.
certainly these are the detailed calculations that we would have to make for round 2, depending on the actions that you take later on in the meeting in regards to this budget. Really, the bigger thing is obviously making you aware that there would be these changes. As you may recall from the workshop, there are a host of other changes that will be coming up in the wage and benefit area, health insurance, retirement, things like that. So all of these numbers will change at a global level. So, these numbers are all just very rough estimates as we go.
Speaking of which, what are we using for wages and benefits numbers? Are we 2%
Yep. Yeah,
increase and steps?
Yep, the initial budgets were developed with a 2% wage increase to the pay grid, as well as step increases, 8% increase for for health insurance. I don't recall what dental was, if that was flat or if there was a small increase there. Wisconsin retirement system was using the same rate as this year. There's changes in pretty much all of those things, and those will be presented in round 2.
In our comp and class study, what's the timeline on getting the results from that? Do we
The
know?
impacts of those will be presented in round 2 in September as well. We don't have the detailed reports, but it's just talking with HR today. They're still on track to deliver things so that we can do that analysis and updates before executive committee in September.
I think I'm going to be gone that month.
Okay. So, all right. So, if there's no other questions on the revenues, maybe
I'd like to
suggest we
point
keep
out
moving
something
down.
else on the revenues, if I might.
Please.
The third line down, state aid. I tried as I might, I cannot figure out where that $60,000 number came from. And I believe perhaps my predecessor was just guesstimating what our state GPR was going to be. But that line item also includes our performance incentive and then also medical support liability and medical support GPR. So if you notice, that percentage went way up, and that's because I'm adding those things in. And I don't know if you heard, the governor did sign a budget that gave a slight funding increase to the child support program. We asked for 4 million. I believe we got we got less than that. It was less than 2 million, I think. So these numbers are actually very likely to increase by about, I'm guessing, $10,000 or so.
And again, the burning question, as always, is how reliable do we believe these projections are?
Well, I received them. I mean, nothing's official until September. They will issue a budget memo with firm numbers for us in September. But we got the go ahead to use these numbers because every county is in the midst of their budget preparations right now.
Right.
So the WCSEA and DCF said we could use these numbers. So
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, back to you.
Okay, if there's no other questions or comments on revenue, we'll move down into the expenditures. And again, I will point out the white section here, for those that have been in meetings have heard this already, but this is information largely presented for wages and benefits. Human resources and payroll work together to do these updates. We work with the departments for changes that are coming on. If you know somebody's retiring, or if you know somebody's changed insurances from family to single, or vice versa, we build those into the budget process. Keep in mind, again, these are pulled together early in the year. There are updates, like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, that will be coming out in round 2. But this is the starting point that all the departments that was presented to the county board at the end of July. So largely there was a 5% wages and salaries, and essentially I believe that relates to step increase, as well as attendance hours. It's pretty much in line with that 2% pay increase that I mentioned. The compensated absences, I believe, Chairman, you may have asked about this before, or it was in another budget meeting. I've had a slew of them. This was highlighted just pointing out that last year there was a budgeted amount for an expected retirement. Nothing is budgeted, at least at this point in round 1, for that purpose. The rest of these are the normal expenditures for benefits and taxes and things that were required. So any questions on the personnel related costs, wages and benefits?
I have 2 questions. One actually was from Supervisor Rogers, and it's on the compensated absences. And I think I know why we don't budget an annual amount for expected expenses that are due to employees at some point in the future. Basically, given levy limits, that doesn't make any sense to us. I guess what is a little troublesome, though, is the uncertainty of those expenses coming in any given budget year. So this is more a rhetorical question than anything, and I wish Supervisor Rogers were here today, because he might have some further questions. But rhetorically, I'm going to ask that we look at some methodology whereby we can account for that future expense over time, rather than being hit with it all at once. But I think I know the answer to the question. Again, given levy limits, that doesn't make any sense at all. A private business can do that because they can put money in the bank and put it aside, and they can do all kinds of things. With us, it's more difficult. Second question, the yellow highlighting is for what?
And that's the next section of the budget that I'll go through. I was focusing on the personnel first. This is
Personnel,
more
and
getting
then
into, the wages
Okay.
and benefits.
Right.
So if there's no other questions on the personnel side.
I do got a little bit, I do got one, I think. We do pay this out because of their sick pay, is that what it is? And their sick pays? for
That's
hours?
correct. Sick leave and vacation.
But once you retire, you're still entitled to that, or is that something you could just eliminate? I'm just asking a question, I know it's.
No, when somebody retires under the employee handbook, there are certain amounts that can be paid out of accumulated earned leave time, sick leave or vacation. So that's what this is reflecting, because the department where that employee worked is charged for that cost. Because it ties to the funding sources for them, and it's part of their operations. It's a benefit that really needs to be paid for by the department. So hopefully that helps, but there's no ongoing, once they've retired and departed, there's no ongoing additional cost. It's a one-time final payout.
Is that part of their contract or something? Or I mean, or why?
It's part
you have
of
to
the
pay it
benefits
out at all?
package. It's part of the benefits package that the
Okay.
county offers in the employee handbook.
I know in some places got that taken away when Act 10 went through, and some of them didn't, so.
Correct. Yeah, there were some union contracts and a lot of benefits and things were changed over the years, but this is reflecting the economic impact of those when we know. Going back to Supervisor Tripp's comments on that. Yeah, in an ideal scenario, you would be funding this on an ongoing basis. You would develop a methodology. My previous employer prior to here had started a process like that 25 years ago and had a percentage that they charged of payroll every year to go into a bank. Unfortunately, with levy freeze, levy limits in place for over 15 years, you're left with a decision. Do you fund something like that, or do you cut a service?
Right.
And I think we
Mhm.
know the answer there.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
And for Bob's information, Dunn County did not cut benefits because of Act 10.
Okay, so going down to then the operational expenditures, to point out here, I mean, the first notable one are filing fees. It's a large percentage, but a small dollar amount. Audit and accounting fees actually went down, readjusting the allocations of those costs. The maintenance contracts, Adobe Acrobat licenses, that's IT charges over that are being allocated to all departments for their share of these different software licenses. And that went up, mainly probably because the number of users that are actually using Adobe Acrobat, as well as some cost increases.
And again,
Going-
excuse me, Keith, if I can interrupt here.
You,
For
please.
those of you who are a little bit newer, those costs used to go to the IT department. And a few years ago, we made the change because it doesn't make sense to bill IT for something that they simply oversee and don't use. So now well, when did we do that? Dave, you probably remember 3-4 years ago, we
Yeah,
changed
about
all
that.
those. Yeah.
It
all those
started with the
IT costs to
2019 budget.
departments.
Yep,
Yeah.
the 2019 budget was the first one impacted.
And,
So,
and that's a much more reasonable way to approach the accounting of it, I think. So,
and it allows us to use outside funding if a department has that outside funding to help cover those costs.
66%.
That's right.
Yep. Okay, so I'll keep going down here unless somebody, speak up. This is intended to be open discussion. Law research, again, some additional costs there. Josie, I don't know if you want to touch on that briefly.
Sure. So, all the things highlighted in yellow are sort of what I had input into, I guess. And I looked at our 5-year average actual, costs and expenses and whatnot. And I believe that that line, particularly for the law research, was cut last year, and it was cut too much because we are signed up automatically to get new law books sent to us whenever the books are published, and they automatically bill us. And so the $290 is what they would bill us for 2 copies of the family code book and a judicial bench book. So I think my predecessor forgot about the judicial bench book and didn't have enough money in there. So I just reallocated, like a shell game. My expenses didn't really change. I just moved it around a bit where it was needed. So.
Okay, so then let's see here. The next notable item then would be, and probably the last notable in all of this, is the operating supplies.
Yep. So I am partaking on a long-term project to get our closed file room into compliance, and I'm destroying files that we no longer need to keep. And so shredding is a big expense. I'm filling that bin quite frequently. And then every time I bring on a new staff, there are certain background checks and fingerprinting that needs to take place. My staff are also notaries. And then these background checks and notaries have to be renewed, different schedules. Some are 3 years, some are 4 years, some are 5 years. So I'm just making sure I have enough money in there to make sure I can pay for all those things.
Okay, and then if there's no other questions, the final points that I would show would be these last items down here. And these are all technology related items that come over from IT department. And essentially a majority of them, the net increase overall is minimal in the grand scheme. It's shuffling around, going to supervisor trips point new for the 2021 budget year was now beginning to allocate out IT equipment replacement. So for example, if a department has 5 laptops and they're expected to last 5 years, instead of borrowing in year 5 to replace them all, we're now doing a 1/5 allocation for each piece of equipment or whatever the life is on those to the departments. IT is tracking that, and we're rolling that out for the same purpose that we talked about as far as the licenses and maintenance costs, so that hopefully we don't have to borrow for those in year 5 when you got to replace all this. There's an accumulated pot of money to do that. So
I
then,
must have been sleeping. Why did that decrease this year?
Mine?
Yeah.
Well, I eliminated a computer for corporation counsel's use in my office in this building. They will be funding that. And then I took that savings and added email encryption licenses for all my staff, which is an IRS compliance issue. We are currently not in compliance there. And then I just noted that our long distance call use, that is our actual, they take what we actually spent last year and plug it in for what next year is going to cost. And IT questioned me like, oh, why'd your long distance jump up? I'm like, well, because of COVID, we're making phone calls more and calling people for court hearings. So that's why that went up.
Okay, thank you.
But then I would note that, so my budget for the, whatever line that is, the IT equipment went down significantly for 2022. But I used the, is it called the CARES Act funding to get, so instead of having 6 desktop computers replaced, I took that opportunity to get laptops reimbursed at 100%. But now when those have to be replaced, it costs more money to replace a laptop than it does a desktop. So even though that went down quite a bit here in 2022, I anticipate it going up in 2023 and later years as they're budgeting for the laptop replacement as opposed to desktop.
okay, so any other questions on their operating, their budget or budget in general for the Child Support Agency? Their overall increase is 2.18%, largely driven by staffing benefit and wage increases. The operating part of it was pretty much within very close to 0% overall.
But frankly, in terms of what's of greatest concern to us, and that is the levy, that actually has, if I go all the way back to the top, decreased by 41%.
Correct. And that was factored or part of
That
that
was
global
right.
picture that
Yep.
I presented. Yep.
All right, now, how have you been proceeding? Do you want the committee to pass a motion recommending this budget as amended to account for the half-year position?
Well, the committee hasn't voted on that proposal yet, but if that is the motion that's made to, approve
Okay.
this, recommend this budget and amend it to include filling that secretary position starting July 1st, that could be the motion if that's
And
approved.
that's been the process so far. Yep.
Correct.
Then I would entertain such a motion to recommend this budget with the appropriate changes to reflect a half-time secretary position be funded rather than a full year. No, I said that wrong. A half a year of the full-time position.
Correct.
So that would begin on July 1st. I'd entertain that motion. Supervisor Bauer moves. Supervisor Vandermillen seconds. All right. Questions, comments, concerns? Got a motion on the floor to go ahead, Bob.
So this is just gonna redo all the facts and numbers and come back with a different percentage probably when you figure it all together.
Yes. Well,
At
what
our
will
next
happen?
meeting, it'll be more numbers. Is that what it is? Or is this one, it's the final one you're gonna send through, I guess?
what will happen, Supervisor Bauer, is if the committee approves this motion, these will be updated in the round two information presented to the executive committee. And it certainly will reflect a reduction in the budget request for this department. And then that'll go through the whole process up to the county board for final approval later on.
That explains it. Good, thank you.
That was a good question though, because basically what I'm asking the committee to do with this motion is to approve the concept of this budget. The exact numbers, we just don't know yet, but by recommending this, we reflect the belief that this is an appropriate budget with an appropriate assignment of personnel and appropriate expenditures for things that need to be paid for. Other comments, questions? Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion to approve, say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, and thank you, Josie. You were kind of our guinea pig going through the first of these budgets. We probably zipped through the rest of them, but I knew you were going to be here, so.
That's right. Thank you, supervisors.
All right, let's see, who's next? Emergency management. I see Melissa in the wings. And again, Keith and Melissa, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'd like to do the same thing if we can go through the organizational chart first. See if I can find my stuff here. Keith has got that shared.
And with that, I will turn it over, Melissa, if you want to cover the your organizational chart, if there's any changes or highlights to it.
Sure. Thank you very much, Keith. Actually, there are not any changes to our organizational chart and have not been for several years. It's been the same, I believe, since around 2007. So we really haven't had any major changes, at least on the communication side. We did have some minor changes on the emergency management side a handful of years ago, but again, no recent changes.
Melissa, can I ask you to explain the management coordinator and the program assistant, those percentages?
Sure. So the program assistant is at 0.74 and has been for several years. And that is just below the threshold so that we do not offer benefits.
Okay.
We do offer retirement. We put into the Wisconsin State Retirement for that position. However, there are no health benefits with that position. In the emergency management coordinator position, that is just under the threshold so that we do not have to offer a Wisconsin State Retirement with that position. So that has no benefits allocated whatsoever. The only thing that they are entitled to is the in lieu of fringe benefits. Same as the program assistant.
Okay, and the management coordinator, that's Steve Findlay,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Does he, is he simply part-time or does he round out a full with a different assignment?
Nope, he
Okay.
is just part-time. Yep.
Okay, shouldn't say it that way.
As is the program assistant, Kristen. Yep.
Right, okay. Those are my only questions. Anybody else? Okay, then we can move right into the budget document.
Keith, did you want me to go through it or you want to start?
Sorry, had to unmute myself. No, please do. Certainly, you can hit the highlights. I'll scroll through.
Okay.
Let me bring this up, blow this up a little bit better, and we'll go from there.
Okay. So basically on the top half, you kind of see our emergency management. We have, kind of three divisions within our budget: the emergency management, the emergency planning, and then the emergency communications. So the emergency management and planning are both under the same division. They just have two different kind of budget categories based on the funding that we receive from the state grant that helps offset the cost of that department. So that's why you see the two different cost centers there for basically our emergency management division. And, basically, as you can see, we do have some levy that we do receive, but we also have the grant funding that we have for both divisions. And then we have the $10,000 hazmat grant, which is basically a pass-through grant for us. We apply for it on behalf of the Menominee Fire Department for our level B hazmat team. And basically we, apply for the grant, purchase the items, and it's just kind of a pass-through. So as far as the emergency communications, we do have some revenue with the tower that Dunn County owns up on Wilson Avenue. And that money indicated there is the revenue that we have from the tower leases that we have with these cell phone companies.
And Melissa, can you explain the reduction in tax levy for emergency management and planning?
I think a little bit there was a couple different things. We had an employee leave and transferred to the sheriff's department, and she was paid at a higher rate than what our current staff is being paid at. So that was part of it. And so then there was also some changes to a couple line items. We had the purchase of the mobile command tires last year, and that money was actually in our daily budget instead of a capital expenditure, because it was not really it did not meet the threshold for the capital expenditures. And so that was in the budget. So then of course we took it out for 2022. So it did decrease a little bit.
So any questions by the committee? Those are the notable. And then you did have an increase, I'm sorry, in the emergency communications. No staffing changes there. So that one's pretty much as you would expect from a revenue standpoint.
Right. Yep.
Okay, so any questions by the committee on the revenue side of things? Oh, I guess we got to hit this big one down here. Capital project.
Yep. As you know, from the 5-year capital planning exercise we did, we always have some sort of capital projects that we are working on. And so we have a couple this year again, and I think we have a couple every year for the next 5 years, but that $218,000 that is documented right there, that is for the 2 capital projects that we intend to complete in 2022.
And this would be the intended funding source per the CIP would be long-term debt. So any questions on the revenue section? Hearing none, I will move down. And this will be, whoops, went too far. Sorry, folks. There. This first one's emergency management, and this is again the wage and benefits, as we talked about earlier, represents the updates for, for example, health insurance. That can be people shifting from single to family or electing to take insurance in comparison to the prior year, things like that. The 2% pay grid adjustment steps, all of that. So this reflects all of those, just like the previous budget. Anything notable in there, Melissa, beyond what we've talked about?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I'm going to keep going, folks. Stop me if you need. Okay. Down here, let's talk about these major changes. So this one's small dollar amount. That's an update for cell phones. So we won't go through that.
And I mentioned that earlier. That is where we had the tire funding for 2021. which has been completed. And so that's why that, does have a decrease in that line item. And other than that, they're just very small dollar amount changes. The emergency management budget, as far as operating expenses, is very small anyway. So when you make a $25 change, it looks like a big deal. But there were not any major changes in that area.
Okay, any questions? Otherwise, I'll keep moving along here.
I guess I have one. Speaking of the maintenance for the motor vehicle, is that just that command center?
No, it is also the F-150 that we have for the emergency management department too. So it's the repair and maintenance for both those vehicles. $2,000 of that $4,000 that we have in there, Chairman Bartlett, is for MC1 storage, or the mobile command storage, which is at the Menominee Fire Department. So $2,000 of that goes right off the top to keep the mobile command unit at Menominee Fire.
All right. That meant, okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, any other questions on emergency management? All right, hearing none, I'll move down to emergency planning. Again, same thing there. No additional comments, regular updates.
I have a question at this also.
Go ahead.
The vacant position to be filled for 3/4 of the year, is the full year in the budget or just 3/4 of it?
I'm sorry, what position was that?
Well, if you look at your organization chart, it says that you have one vacant position that's going to be filled in the 2nd quarter of the year. And so I'm asking, is this budget budgeting for that position for the full year or for 3/4 of the year?
The program assistant is at 0.74, and it is across an entire year. It's for the entire calendar year. And that position was vacant at the time that they did the first PEP spreadsheet. However, it was filled May 10th, I believe. Yep.
Oh, wait a minute. It was filled May 10th.
And that,
so next
right.
year it's filled for the whole year.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
And I think that, yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, let's see here. Screen sharing paused. I figure out what happened here. Sorry, folks. I don't do this very often. So let's see here. Let me go back to emergency. Let's see. Sorry, went to the wrong one. No, that's medical examiner. Let's see here.
There you go. You got it.
Let's see, emergency management. Here we go.
I was just one tab over.
Okay. Too many screens opened up here.
Right.
Okay, so emergency planning. Anything else to note in this budget, or any other questions from the committee? Hearing none, this one has a decrease of 6%, dropping from 55,000 to 50, just short of 52. Okay, emergency communications, and this was the one that was pretty much more stable with maybe less turnover, driving a reduction in the wages and benefits. So we'll go down to operations unless somebody has questions up in wages and benefits. Okay, hearing none.
You're not sharing your screen if you think you are.
Oh, goodness, I am so sorry. Let me shrink this down. Thank you for speaking up. There we go. That's better?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So again, emergency communications, there were no notable changes in the staffing, wages and benefits here other than normal adjustments. So going down here into the operations, yeah, you got $300 increase in teletype expense. That's just an updates based on the actuals. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Again, we did not have any major changes throughout our operating expense, budget for 2022. We may have, like you said, just based on actuals from previous years, decreased or increased. I think overall I ended up with a slightly lower amount in operating supplies or operating expenses. It's just the capital capital projects that ends up increasing our budget.
Okay. And then small increase for time system. Again, those are
Right.
typical increases. And then a couple $100 decrease in publications.
Right.
And then tower rental, this increase there.
Yeah, there was an increase in there, but I think that it evened out with some of the changes that I made on some other things.
Okay.
Who do you rent the tower space from?
For that line item, we rent space at the Wheeler Tower, which is owned by the state of Wisconsin for
Is that the
public
radio
television.
tower? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And your publications, you didn't cancel that subscription to the Reader's Digest for the restroom, did you?
No, we kept that just
Okay.
for you.
Okay, good. Just worried about that.
And with
Okay.
I got a question. I mean, with the COVID, if that keeps going the way it is and stuff like that, do you see you using the conference and seminars and the travel? You're gonna be using it, you think?
Possibly the travel, we may not. The conferences and seminars, we definitely will use some of that based on, the staffing level too. We definitely have certifications that we have to maintain. And so we have to have a certain amount of training a year to maintain those certifications. So if we're unable to attend these trainings, we'll have to do it virtually. So that the expense for the conference or the training itself would still be there. It's just, I'm unsure about the travel.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, we'll scroll down to the bottom here, and the last item in this budget is, again, as you talked about earlier on the revenue side, the capital expenditure per the CIP plan for the generator replacement and the repeater replacement.
Yep. Yeah. So we've talked about the generator at the Menominee Tower site, which we own, that definitely needs to be replaced. It was taken out of the old jail when we moved out of there and moved up to that tower site. And so it's at end of life and needs to be replaced. And then the other one is the law enforcement radio repeater replacement. We have several repeaters at 3 different tower locations that need replacement or need replacing.
Okay, any other questions? Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Mr. Chairman to, I guess, entertain any motions.
I've got a question about the repeaters. Is that going to improve our communication, or will it just keep it the same as it is?
Actually, I think as far as coverage goes, it will probably be about the same. Reliability is definitely going to increase. I think we have, our repeaters that we currently have are 5 or 6 years old, and each generation they improve the reliability and improve the ability to make changes remotely and different things like that. So I don't think it'll increase our coverage, but it'll definitely increase some reliability to make sure that those repeaters are operating optimally all the time.
Do we still have problems in like the northern part of the county? I don't hear the complaints as much as I used to.
Mhm.
So have they gotten better? Has it gotten better or the complaints just gave up?
I think, to be honest, Chairman, I think a little bit of both.
Okay.
We have been continuing to make some changes. We recently hired a new company to come in and start going over basically what we have for coverage now and where it needs improvement. We already know these things, but we were working with a different company, and the gentleman that had a lot of the knowledge with our system and how it operated did pass away. And so we hired a new company. We're working with him. And so he's coming to each tower site and just kind of going through it, gathering all the data, and gonna come up with a plan on how to improve our coverage. While he was doing this, he did find a couple things that we can do to increase or improve our coverage right now without, some major expenses. And so we're going to work on those first, see if we have any increases, see if we have any, improvements to some of that coverage. So, like I said, he found a couple minor glitches. One, he was able to, fix rate that day with some minor programming. The other one was about a $2,200 fix on some cables that he found that had, some minor kinks in it that would improve, the signal coverage area up, basically out of the North Tower, up in Wheeler. So, yeah, so we're just kind of getting all our bases covered again, just to go over that entire project that we've been working on for a couple of years. How do we increase that coverage in that western portion of our county?
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
At this point, I would entertain a motion to recommend the budget for emergency management, emergency planning, 911. And I don't think there are any suggested adjustments. Is that correct? All right, then a motion would be in order if somebody would like to make one. Supervisor Bauer moves, Supervisor Vandermillen seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion to recommend the budget from emergency planning management, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Melissa.
Yes, thank you very much.
And that brings us to the medical examiner's budget. And in just a minute, we'll turn this over to Keith and Marcy. I see she's chomping at the bit. We're running a little bit late, not too bad. And again, if we can start out with the organizational chart, and then we can move from there into the budget documents. And Marcy, I'll ask you, Keith is madly trying to load up his screen. And Marcy, anything you want to comment on? I think this is relatively new enough so that most folks remember the change in your organizational structure.
Right, just as you see, it just reflects the addition of an additional chief deputy medical examiner.
And for those of you who had a chance to look at the monthly report, that's all in there as well.
Yes.
So we're looking at, oh, no, I got the wrong one. I'm bad as Keith here. I didn't say that out loud, did I?
There we go. I am so sorry for this, folks. There we go.
Yeah.
Here's the org chart.
Thank you, Keith.
Me too. I've got another screen here and I just found it too. I don't know why it's so hard to find. Medical examiner, now 2 chief deputies, which is a move, frankly, folks, we should have made 2-3 years ago. And then the deputy medical examiners at 5.25 positions. How do you manage that, Marcy?
Well, those deputy medical examiners are the folks that I've talked about in the past, are limited to that 1,559 hours per year per person. to avoid the benefits. And so not all of my deputies meet that 1559. It's not a requirement of them, but yet it's a limitation, basically.
Right.
I have a couple of deputies who would love to work more hours than that, and a few who can't meet that, and all of which have full-time jobs. So I can't schedule them where I want them. I need to schedule us 3 full-time people around their availability, and the addition of a third full-time person has already been very helpful. Although we've been busy with training with him and my new deputy medical examiner.
All right, I will turn this over to you and Keith, and do with it what you will.
So if there's no other questions on the organizational chart, which I think, you've had lots of discussion recently, I'll bring up the budget then. And this will reflect the changes that were just approved earlier this year to add that additional position. So with that, let me blow this up so we can read it a little bit better. And okay, first thing is the medical examiner budget. Theirs has 2 splits. One is for the Dunn County portion and one for the Eau Claire portion in the expenditure side. On the revenue, they're brought together because of the net impact. Obviously, there's a big impact to the tax levy with adding that second deputy, full-time deputy ME. So Marcy, maybe if you want to explain that, what that makes up, with that position.
Right. 80% of that increase reflects that second full-time chief deputy medical examiner. And basically prior to this, we had myself and my chief deputy, and the addition of, in talking through with the supervisors and chairperson and Keith and Paul, instead of the 80-20 split going 80% to Eau Claire, which since we have joined forces and made contract for services to Eau Claire, it was decided that it was appropriate for this split of the new chief deputy medical examiner be 80-20 still, but that split being 80% to Dunn County and 20 to Eau Claire County.
Okay, and I know this was talked about at length, a couple months ago as you went through the process for the contingency fund request and so on. I don't know if there's additional questions on the tax levy portion of this.
It seems to me that well, let's talk about the other sources of funding first, and then we can go back to that. PCS medical examiner revenue, can you tell us about that?
Yes, the only invoices that the medical examiner can create are invoices for services of certification of death certificates and authorization for cremation permits. And so that's where that number comes from, we invoice the funeral homes and they in turn are charging the families. We can't charge individual families, but it goes through the funeral home for our services. And that's where those numbers are.
And how about the next one down, local public safety?
That's the number that reflects the contract for service with Eau Claire County.
Okay.
So that would pick up their additional 20% share on that new position that was added this year, as well as the cost increase that are projected for their share of all the other positions.
Right. As I was going to say, if you look at if you go back to the first line, then the general property levy, that virtually doubled. And just the addition of that position alone wouldn't account for that. But we've got other increases as well. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Okay, so if there's no other questions on revenues, we'll
I guess I
slide-
have a
oh,
question. The one deputy is 80-20 split one way and the other one's a 80-20 split the other way. So basically we have one deputy for Dunn County and one deputy for Eau Claire County. Now that you've been in it for just a short while, is that pretty much how it's working out? That one deputy is spending all their time in Dunn County and one in Eau Claire County? Or I'm just asking if the percentages are working out the way you thought they were going to, basically.
I think that they will work out that way, yes. I will use each of those deputies in both counties, but it will end up being about an 80-20 split for each one of them, yes. I think
Okay,
it's important to have both of them, each of us, including myself, work in both counties, to be present in both counties and serving both counties as the full-time and management people. So that we're also all three working with our deputy staff on these higher profile cases as well.
right. I guess I was just wondering about that, if the split basically in the end is going to be one deputy for each county, because I mean, Eau Claire is bigger. So I was suspecting that we would have had a little bit less than an equal amount from the deputy medical examiner positions, but maybe it'll work out that Dunn County uses one and Eau Claire County uses one. I realize that they're both going to both counties, but the end result is we're each paying for 100% of one of them.
Correct. And prior to Eau Claire County is bigger, but Eau Claire County has the same amount of hours in a day and days in a week and weeks in a month that we provide coverage. We always provide coverage, at least one deputy in Dunn County and one deputy in Eau Claire County at all times. And so our Dunn County person, I was on today for Dunn County and I ended up in Eau Claire on a case because 2 cases come in. So we shift to that, and Dunn County, prior to the hiring of this additional chief deputy, was covering the full year with basically 2 people, myself and the other chief deputy, and then we were also covering Eau Claire County, and we'd use a deputy over in Dunn County because that's what we had in our budget to a certain amount, but most of the deputies are over in doing their hours in Eau Claire County. I don't know if that helps to answer your question, but yes.
Yeah, it does. And I just want to be sure that that's the way the percentages are working out. And, maybe when we're in it for a lot longer, you'll find that it changes, or maybe you'll be correct and it's pretty much one deputy medical examiner per county. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Marcy, one thing that you just made a remark that was interesting, and I tend to forget it myself. We're paying for deputies and medical examiners to be on duty.
Correct.
So Eau Claire may see a larger number of cases, but still there's 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week, and that's what we're paying for in terms of the hours for our deputies and our chief deputies. And that helps to, for me at least, when I think about that, it helps me to rationalize the 80-20 split in any case. Because we're looking at a number of hours. So theoretically, if nobody ever died, one person could do the job. Well, you could get 6 people to do the job, work 3 shifts a day, 1/3 of the days a year.
Right.
Okay. That's
Even-
that's
even-
that's an important point, and I hope I was really happy to hear you say that tonight, because I tend to forget myself that these positions are as much an on-call position as they are actually going out to address a case. So
And the end tips, if us here in Dunn County or Eau Claire County, it doesn't happen very often. There's business every day to do, because just because there's a case today, there's follow up and follow through anywhere from 3 to 10 more days, including it could be court proceedings. So there's all of that follow up. So whether we go on a case today, there's a certain amount of stress just being available for this type of work and cases and service to our community. And it does keep us from family or other activities, or we are dedicated to the county for that entire shift, which is typically 24-hour shifts.
thank you. All
You're
right,
welcome.
back to Keith.
Okay, moving down into the expenditures then. The first would be the Dunn County portion of the expenditures. And as the note says next to the salaries and wages, again, this reflects the additional pay for that second chief deputy medical examiner in the splits, as well as the budgeted pay grid increase and steps if applicable. All the other benefits, again, are adjustments to that as well. The normal process of factoring health insurance and other benefits. In this case, health insurance expense went up significantly because our normal conservative budgeting practice is, if we don't have an incumbent in a position at the time this budget is put together, we always err towards family coverage and then adjust based on what actually happens down the road. So that way the department is not cut short where all of a sudden they have a big spike in their costs. So that's the personnel side of Dunn County. Then we'll roll down to, I'm sorry, this jumped on me, pages. Here's the Dunn County operating expenditures. So I will scroll through those, no changes in forensics. $750 increase in blood tests. Marcy, anything to note on that?
Just we're seeing more of the drug overdose cases at Dunn County that require us to use toxicology testing, and those tests are also, charges are also increasing that we receive from private labs.
So that ties up into that revenue up above.
Yes.
Okay.
Let me interrupt here a minute if I could. You talked about drug overdoses. I think they anticipate perhaps at the end of this year, but more likely at the beginning of next year, there should be some of the lawsuit settlement money available. Have we, it's very premature actually. Have we thought about that at all in terms of some of the expenses for the medical exam?
I'm not aware of any discussion, Marcy.
I'm not aware of any discussion on that either.
I'm generally aware of that ongoing discussion at a very, very high level, but really until it gets boiled down a little bit more and then, more detail on how they plan to allocate those funds out and the intended uses. I don't think we really have anything on that to this point.
Okay, thank you.
All right, then moving down to maintenance contracts. Again, this reflects the allocation. One of the things that in looking at on a year-by-year basis, working with Marcy and IT, is how we allocate the technology costs. And obviously this team, just like all the other operational areas, require technology. And we made a change here this year to reflect really that allocation between Dunn County and Eau Claire County. Is that correct, Marcy?
Yes. The previous IT manager, well, we didn't have a whole lot of IT charges before this because we were using our own equipment. So last year was our first year of having an IT charge. And the prior IT manager wanted to keep the IT charges all in Dunn County and chose that that's where they should stay. But when I met with Keith and Paul, I brought this up, if this should be a 20-80 split as well, and we discussed it. And that's why we'll see kind of a decrease, because initially it was going to be 100% at done until we talked about it, and then it switched over. So this is the first year I've really seen the maintenance contracts and cell phone contracts, because we didn't have county-owned computers and weren't involved with IT before 2021. So we actually see a reduction because we moved 80% over into the Eau Claire spot or line items.
So then all of these technology related items, the rest of this page are really tied to that conversation and analysis, also discussion with Dan Dunbar from IT to more or less line this up. And it's my understanding, Marcy, correct me if I'm wrong, that Eau Claire County has no concerns with this.
That's correct. When Paul reached out to Eau Claire County with the concerns of possible burnout and being able to provide coverage to the counties, and that it was going to be a cost factor to both counties, they replied that they were very happy with the service that they were getting, and they would find the money where they needed to, was the response from the folks in Eau Claire County, which I was grateful to hear the support in Eau Claire County as well as the support I've received in Dunn County.
Okay, moving down to the bottom of the Dunn County budget. Next notable is conferences and seminars. The note there is additional, more or less training for that additional position. Anything to add to that, Marcy?
No, just to piggyback a little bit, when Melissa was on, I still need to get the deputies trained, and there many of the trainings that we would travel to prior to COVID are offering online training. It still is at a cost. So I chose to keep that in there to have my deputies be able to attend virtual trainings.
Okay, the next line item is clothing and uniform. Again, an increase there for an additional position. And then IT equipment decrease. That's further refinement of technology related charges. So any other questions or any questions on the Dunn County Medical Examiner, largely driven by the additional position?
I have a question.
Yes.
I think I know the answer, but I guess I'm just asking. The travel portion, program related, is that mostly expense of travel for doing day-to-day business?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Speak up.
And I guess to follow up, is that a split also?
The Eau Claire County has its own line item.
Okay,
We charge Eau Claire County in a very large invoice, detailed invoice, I should say, every month, right down to gloves used, body bags used, equipment used. Every mile is documented that any of us drive for Eau Claire County, and is kept separate from what we drive for Dunn County. Everything is kept completely separate and very well documented.
okay. And for my own information, you use your own vehicles, correct?
Yes, we do.
Yes, that's what I thought. Okay,
And Marcy, mileage calculated from the person's home?
Yes, from where we leave from. Yes,
Right.
yes.
yeah,
We do not charge mileage to go to meetings or to drive into work. It's all case related if we're
Right.
driving.
And using that approach certainly keeps us from having taxable benefits, that if we're paying for commuter miles from home to work, but if we're doing at the benefit of the employer, which would be us or Eau Claire County, well, Dunn County. If we're doing it right to the scene, then yeah, there's really no taxable
Yep.
issue there.
But I would think, Marcy just mentioned, not paying for meetings, and going to work. I understand the going to work, but if there's a meeting that's required, I don't know, I would expect that to be paid, but maybe I'm wrong.
The county currently does not do that routinely.
Really?
So for example, when I have to come in for a county board meeting, I'll just speak for myself. That's not a reimbursement to the employee. That's part of my duties.
All right. I was thinking of a different type of meeting. Okay,
If my job requires me to go to a meeting for a death review meeting in Eau Claire, then I can use mileage for that because
Okay.
it's within my workday, but not my departmental meeting with my deputies.
okay, okay. I appreciate that explanation. I understand that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Okay, moving down into the Eau Claire portion then of the medical examiner's budget. Again, the first half of this is, or the top portion is wages and benefits again. 13.6% increase. Again, that would be for any pay adjustments, the 2% pay grid increase, as well as that additional 20% for the one position, and then adjustments here. Marcy, I don't know if you want to touch on overtime. That's a notable decrease there. Is that based on actual reviews?
I think it was based on, yes, from this last year and during COVID, we were, if my deputies who are on the 1559 limit of hours, if they go over a certain amount of hours in a pay period, they have to get paid out overtime on their hours. We try and keep that from happening. This last year, myself and Chief Deputy Johnson worked an awful lot of hours because of the inavailability for my deputies to be able to cover hours. So it reduced how many hours the deputies worked, and in fact, then how many overtime hours might be in there, because we are both salary and, aren't eligible for overtime, and that's why we see that in there.
Okay, thank you. Any questions in wages and benefits for the committee? Otherwise, I'll keep rolling on.
I have a question, and that is the Eau Claire expenses are invoiced to Eau Claire, right?
Correct.
So I'm wondering, why is it necessary to have this piece in our budget at all?
I was just going to ask that about us going over this during this meeting, because Eau Claire actually has to approve this part of it. Am I correct, Keith?
No, this is part of Dunn County's budget. We're providing the service and charging them. They won't
Okay.
have this level of detail. They will have this, I presume. I have not seen their budget, but basically they have a contracted service. What this does, and the reason this is in and required to be in Dunn County's budget, we still are incurring the costs. These deputy medical examiners are Dunn County employees. We contract to Dunn County to Eau Claire County, and they pay us via the invoice. But we have to have the budgetary authority to incur these expenses, even if
Okay.
we're invoicing them. So it completes the full picture of having the revenues and expenditures for the service we provide.
Okay, thank you. Otherwise, I thought, what's the purpose? I suppose under the worst case scenario, if Eau Claire didn't pay us, we'd still be responsible for the incurring the expenses.
That is correct. I mean, in a worst case scenario, because we would have to pay the people, we're obligated.
Right.
If we ordered supplies, we'd be obligated to pay it irregardless.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you. I appreciate that.
You bet. So then rolling down into the operating expenditures, again, blood tests, very similar to, all of these will probably mirror comments from the other one. It's just the 80-20 split. Is that a accurate statement, Marcy?
Correct.
Okay, so I don't think I'm going to go through all those individually again, and I'll turn it over to the committee if you've got any final questions on this portion.
Thank you, Keith and Marcy. Members of the committee, anybody have comments, questions?
I have another question.
Dave, go ahead.
And it's just, I'm not questioning the budget. I'm just trying to understand it better. The transport for autopsies, I just noted it stuck out to me because it went up, and I understand that. I'm not questioning that. I was wondering, so I understand it better. Does one of your deputies take somebody up there? Or do you have like reserve, like the sheriff's department has people that transport people? Do you have somebody that just does that, or do one of your team actually have to take a body up to the cities?
So the answer to your question is myself and Chief Deputy Johnson both have vehicles that have been used to transport bodies.
Okay.
But that increase in, we don't get paid to do that. It's a situational service that we've provided at times when we were meeting the needs of the situation. An example, without getting into detail, is an interstate fatality where the interstate is closed and it's treacherous weather, and to bring out a funeral home for transport is not indicated as being safe. We will transport in situations. That's just one. It's not very often. The increase of the money in a big part comes from Eau Claire. Sacred Heart Hospital had an pathology department that was available to us for what we call medical autopsies, ones that don't require a forensic pathologist to perform. And we got notification, and I spoke of it briefly at one of our meetings, that I just got notification about 6 weeks ago that they've closed their doors permanently to the medical examiners and coroner's offices surrounding Eau Claire County. They closed the doors at the beginning of COVID to us with the anticipation they would open up after the pandemic, and they've decided not to. So now all of our autopsies for Eau Claire County and Dunn County have to be transported to Ramsey County, and that's a big cost.
Okay, I guess I wasn't questioning as much that, that the expense went up. So sometimes in a case of bad weather or something, your team does transport, but the majority of time it's a funeral home that does the transporting?
Yes, there's not a contract for the medical examiner's office to transport bodies. And there's not provision of a vehicle for transport. We just happen to each own a vehicle that we can use for transport, which is our personal vehicle. And we do so very respectfully with the decedent and its family, and he or she's family in mind. But no, and especially in light of the drug overdoses that we're seeing in all age groups, I have really limited my availability to assist in that capacity as much as I used to. It's my personal vehicle.
So the majority of the time you use
yes.
a funeral home though?
Correct.
Okay. That's what I was, that was my main question. I was wondering who actually did it majority.
And you asked me if we do. It's a little bit of a question that I want to be careful how I answer, because it's all about respect for me and the
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think it's appropriate to get a motion to recommend the budget for the medical examiner. I don't think there were any suggested adjustments, were there? Does my memory fail me? Then I would entertain a motion to recommend the ME budget. Supervisor Bauer moves, Supervisor Vandermillen seconds. Any discussion about the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
your willingness to hang around a little bit. We're running just a little bit late tonight. Not too
Problem.
bad.
Not a problem.
All right, that takes us through tonight's edition of budget consideration. I don't think there's anything for item number 8. Nothing to come before the committee this month. Number 9, announcements. My only announcement is don't forget, we're going to do this again next Monday. Anybody else have announcements? Don't see anything else for the good of the order. Then, thank you, folks. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Krista. Thanks to all the staff. You know, I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again tonight. There are times when I just could not be more proud to be part of Dunn County government, and this is one of them. I wish every citizen who's got a grudge against government officials and staff were to watch and listen to some of this. You folks do an amazing job, and I continue to be impressed. So thanks to all of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey,
Thank you.
And with that, we'll adjourn, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.
thank you very much for answering all my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome. See you next week.
Josie, how you doing on minutes?
Thank you.
I'm good. I was just gonna ask, did Supervisor Zons ever?
Never did.
Okay, so is he just absent or